Hello, everyone, and let me thank you again for joining me for today's edition of Arkansas Alive. It's always a blessing to me to know that you're tuned in, whether in the morning or the evening, and are there for the Holy Spirit to minister to you. That's a real blessing to us, and I know to our partners. This week's topic is going to be how to face the last days without fear. You know, you hear all kinds of stuff that's going on, and a lot of the prophecy end time messages contain a lot of fear. Hilton Sutton used to always say that God called him to preach the end times without fear. Now, let me just make a little statement before we get started. I'm not going to be giving you 10 steps to the formula of how to live in the last days without fear. It's not going to be that kind of information. I think you'll be blessed, though, and I think it'll help you. If you stay tuned, God's going to minister to you. So here we go. Stay tuned. Arkansas Alive starts right now. You know, there's no doubt in the Scriptures that we're living in perilous times. The word perilous is translated dangerous or severe. I've lived on this earth a long time already, and I have never seen anything like what we're seeing today. And I would only surmise that if my father were still living, if my father was still living, he'd be 100 years old. Or my grandfather, if he was still living, those two generations would not believe what's going on in our culture and around the world today. They saw some pretty tough times. My father, of course, his father were raised during the Great Tribulation period. I mean, my grandfather lived during that time. My father was raised. He was a teenager during the Great, did I say tribulation? I mean the Great Depression. During the Great Depression. They saw some tough times, but not dangerous and not severe and not perilous times. They were just tough times. But if you go to 2 Timothy, and that's where we want to start today, and you listen to what the Apostle Paul was writing to Timothy. Now, it does good. Context means everything. It'll help you understand stuff that you hadn't been able to understand. But if you go over to the beginning of 2 Timothy, which is Paul's second epistle to his son in the faith, Timothy, he really exhorts him on what to do, how to do it, and to beware of what's going on. And when you get over to 2 Timothy chapter 3, the Apostle Paul says, and remember now, he's writing to his son in the faith, Timothy, who became the pastor at the church at Ephesus, which Paul started. So Paul raised Timothy in the fear and admonition of the Lord and taught him the word of faith and taught him what to do and how to recognize things. And now he's telling him, Timothy, this know also. Everything that he has said previously, he is charging Timothy about being a person of integrity. He charges him on personal conduct, how to conduct himself. And, my generation, my father was of the greatest generation. They were born between 1922 and, maybe 1945, something like that. The greatest generation, the World War II generation. And, of course, my grandfather, his father before him, they were English. They came from England and Ireland. In Scotland to this country. And my father and grandfather were very, how would you say, very conservative, very traditional. Our whole family was, especially in the area of appearance, in dress. And I was raised that way. My father, his father before him. My grandfather, born in 1889, after he retired, he was superintendent of mails down at the main post office on Capitol Avenue. After he retired at 65, he came home, and he would get up every morning and put on a clean, starched white shirt with a necktie just to sit in the chair and read the paper. That was it. He didn't have to go to work anymore. He had retired. He'd worked for the government. He was a tither. But he continued to maintain his personal conduct, his personal appearance. My father grew up in that. My father, he dressed the same way. And my father taught me to dress the same way. In fact, there was a time in my father and myself, there's only 20 years difference in our ages, that I could wear his clothes. And sometimes I would go get in his closet and put on a coat or a tie, and he would catch me. He said, "You've been in my closet." He didn't mind. There were certain things I couldn't wear. I couldn't wear his shoes because he had little feet and I had bigger feet. But I could wear some of his clothes. And styles didn't change that much. He told me one time, he said, fads come and go. Winds of doctrine come and go. But fashion is always in. So if you will always stay in fashion, not fads, not the latest style, but fashion, you'll always be properly dressed. Now, I'm sharing all that for a reason, not to just reminisce nostalgia, to let you know that Paul was telling Timothy those very things, not so much ties and neckties and all that, but he was talking to him about his personal conduct. And you've seen, I have too. I don't remember the guy's name. He's a politician, a senator from Minnesota, somewhere like that, maybe Pennsylvania. And he got called on the carpet for his dress as a United States senator because he was wearing hoodies and golf shorts and tennis shoes. And some people probably thought that was horrible that the Senate came up with a dress code and tried to require him how to dress. They say he's got mental illness. He's not all there, and that's very apparent by looking at him. Now, if you were to go to Capitol Hill today, and I go there every year in July, and we visit all of our state senators and House of Representative members for Christians United for Israel. I've known them for years, and we go every year, been going for 15 years now. And you can't go anywhere in that Capitol building and see any of those legislators, but that they're not wearing a coat and a tie. That's their personal conduct. It represents who they are. They're representing you. And this guy, whatever his name is, I can't remember, he's doing his thing and sticking his nose up in the air to people that he thinks they're trying to make him conform. No, they're trying to show him to honor his position. When I was in the Navy, we had to wear our uniforms when we left the base, when we came back on the base. Now, if you went out on the beach, we all had lockers where we had civilian clothes, but you couldn't wear your civilian clothes on base. Why? Because you were a serviceman. You were military. You were bound to a code of conduct and dress code. So those things are not bad. They're just not taught anymore because people are afraid. John Fetterman, that's his name. Thank you, Dan, for reminding me of that. You may have seen him on the news. Don't know the man, don't know anything about him, except he's appears to be a little off. And so you might think this is clothesline preaching, but it's not. It all depends. What you see on the outside is usually what's on the inside. I drive through these neighborhoods and I see the carports, the doors are open, and those garages are absolutely unbelievable. There's no cars in there. There's no cars in the garage. It's all furniture and play toys, and there's no room for the car because of all the junk that's in there. Well, I guarantee you the house is just like that. I always knew when I got picked up to the airport if I was going to a church, I always knew what kind of church I was going to by the condition of the automobile and the person that picked me up at the airport. It never failed. If I got picked up in a sloppy car that was full of trash, I knew that that's what kind of church I was going to. If I got picked up in a nice, clean, polished, washed car, I knew that's what kind of church I was going to. And, you know, your outward appearance, like, who was it? I think it was our friend from Australia. He said, clothes don't make the man, but they sure do introduce him. I saw a surgeon come to meet me. I was the patient's pastor, and he was their surgeon. And he walked in the room, and the man I was going to see, his wife was there. She introduced me to the surgeon and said, this is Dr. So-and-so, and he's going to do surgery on my husband tomorrow. I stood up and I greeted him. Now, this guy had on a psychedelic do-rag around his head. He had on blue jeans with holes in them, tennis shoes, and what kind of shirt did he have on? Anyway, it was some kind of sweatshirt hanging out. And I thought to myself, you know, if this is the way this guy looks, I wouldn't want him operating on me, because the way he looks outside may be the kind of surgery he does. Okay, I'll get off of that. Maybe you're getting uncomfortable or critical. But Timothy was being mentored by Paul and was being told, in addition to your personal conduct, in addition to the kind of character you're demonstrating and the kind of integrity, he said, I want you to know this also. Now we come back down to 2 Timothy chapter 3. This know also, Timothy, that in the last days, now we're in those last days now, perilous times shall come, severe, dangerous times. Now, if you go to a big box store and you walk across the parking lot, you can just as easily be shot, killed, dead walking through the parking lot as you can be in a gang warfare. There is no respect for life, there's no honor for life, and anybody that feels like it can shoot you at any time. It's dangerous. I preached in a church in Dodge City, Kansas, and they want to know if I'd like to go down and see the old Front Street, which is, you know, the Hollywood version of Gunsmoke. When they made the movie, they actually built that town, that Front Street, right where Front Street used to be in Dodge City, Kansas, right off the railroad tracks. And there's a movie that plays in there, and the only living cast member that's still alive is the guy that played Newley. And he does a dissertation and tells you the history of Dodge City. He said, during the time of Gunsmoke, 1860-something, he said Dodge City, Kansas was the most dangerous city in the world. It was the murder capital of the world. I'd never heard that before. Now, today, New Orleans, Louisiana, is the murder capital of the world, according to statistics. But they said you could walk down the street in Dodge City, Kansas, minding your own business, and some cowboy would come riding by and just shoot you dead right where you walked, and nobody would think a thing about it. He said it was dangerous. Well, Paul is telling Timothy, it's just as dangerous now. It's severely dangerous, perilous times. Now, he begins to tell you why it's perilous times. I hadn't forgot my subject, how to face the last days without fear. Listen to this. It says, and this is the number one cause that he's living with here. This is the number one cause of the deterioration of the human culture. It says, men shall be lovers of their own selves. Self-love is the culprit. It's the contributing factor to creating the culture that we're in. Self-love. Not self-sacrifice, not humility, self-love. Men should be lovers of themselves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful and unholy. I underline that disobedience to parents. You know, that's the major cause. The dissolution of the family is what's opened up our culture to the danger and the severity of what we're experiencing. The family was God's molding pot. It was God's crucible of instruction and formation. The family is what God taught and expected to shape and form the lives of the children born to it. Of course, now we kill the children before they're born. So we eliminated 60-something million children in the last few years, few decades. We've killed 63 million of the previous generations. But if the child is born, they may not be born into a family that loves them. They may not have instruction from the father and love from the mother. So many single parents struggling to try and raise their children. Absentee fathers. Just because you can produce an offspring biologically doesn't mean you're a father. You can do that with animals and breeding stock and so forth. But you're not a father unless you disciple that child, unless you are there for the child, unless you mentor the child. So, disobedience to parents, unthankful. Jeannie and I always pray over our food, morning, noon, and night. Every time we eat, we pray and thank God for our food. And one day, I was praying, and the Lord just spoke to me so gently. He said, I appreciate you thanking me for your food. He said, I don't have many Christians that thank me for their food. I thought, and he said it like it was kind of hurtful. I don't have many Christians that thank me for their food. We ought to all be thanking him. Unthankful, unholy, without natural affection. Now, of course, abortion is certainly in that category, but we have sex slaves, we have sex trafficking, we have pornography, we have perversion. And so it says, without natural affection. Truce breakers is the next one. They don't keep their word. They're not honest. Their word means nothing. False accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof, from such turn away. Now, he lists all of the characteristics that contribute to the deterioration of human behavior. Self-love is the number one, and it causes this deterioration from the very beginning. I remember when I was a child and they graded us differently. Our report cards had two different columns. We were marked on citizenship, and we were marked on our grade skill, our math, reading, science, whatever. And when I'd take my report card home, in those days, your parents had to sign the report card, and you'd take it back to the teacher. That was verification to the teacher that your parents had seen how you were doing in school. So your education was A, B, C, D, F, and your citizen was satisfactory and unsatisfactory. Well, when I would take my report card home and my father would see the marks, the first thing he looked at was citizenship. That was the most important thing to him, because he could have helped me with, multiplication tables and memorization and reading and all that. But citizenship has to be modeled and taught and breeded and produced. And I would be closer to getting a whipping for unsatisfactory citizenship marks than I would a C or a D in algebra or mathematics, because citizenship was so important to him. He modeled it before me, and he expected me to listen to him, follow after him. He was my example. So he's telling Timothy, here are all the things that are contributing to the deterioration of the character of society. And the number one contribution, he says here, is self-love. Self-love, loving self, putting self up front before everything, even before Jesus, even before God, even before the Scriptures. What's in it for me? What am I going to have to give up? What do I have to do? Now, let's run over to Matthew 24. These scriptures go together. Matthew 24, and let's begin with verse 7. For nation shall rise against nation, and you will hear of wars, rumors of wars. See that you be not troubled. For all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There'll be famines, pestilence, earthquakes in diverse places. We've seen all of this every day. We see it on the news, social media. He says all these are the beginning of sorrows. Now, this is a metaphor for birth pains. When a woman begins to have labor pains, this is the beginning before the birth takes place. And that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing these birth pangs. Now, whether we can turn it around or whether we can stop it remains to be seen. I hear a lot of times the people say, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to pray more, we need to... But we've done all of that in the past, and nothing has changed. It seems to be getting worse and worse. It's not a negative confession. Just stick your head outside, take a look and see. The deterioration, the perilous, severe, dangerous times are increasing. Jesus said they would. He said these things must come to pass. Then he goes on, and he says, then they shall deliver you to be afflicted and shall kill you, and you'll be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Now keep in mind, at this particular place, and always remember context is very important, Jesus is talking to his Jewish disciples. And he's telling them, you're going to be persecuted and hated for my name's sake. Well, as Christians, we're experiencing the same thing today, worse than before. And then shall many be offended and betray one another and shall hate one another. Many false prophets shall arise and shall deceive many. And because iniquity shall abound, did you hear that? Abound, iniquity, wickedness shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. Now go over to John 13, 34 and 35. And I want to contrast this with what Jesus said to these same disciples. John 13, 34 and 35. He said, a new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. And by this love, the word there is used agape, love one another as I've loved you. How does God love us? He so loved, he gave. I want you to love one another as I have loved you, And by this love shall all men know that you are my disciples, if you have love one to another. Wow. That's pretty simple, isn't it? That's not complicated. That's not complex. You can preach 1,000 messages, on the state capitol grounds. You can preach messages in football stadiums. But he says the way that people are going to know that you're my disciple is the love that you have one for another. The way you treat one another, the way you love one another. He's talking about Christians. He's talking about Christians loving other Christians. He's talking about believers loving other believers. That's how people are going to know that you're my disciples. So think about what do we see Christians doing? How do we conduct ourselves towards each other? Christians with Christians. In 1988, Dr. Lester Sumrall called me on the phone and said, I want you to meet me in Tulsa. I want you and Ed Dufresne. Ed was a friend of mine. He lived in California, but he had moved to Tulsa, and he was living in Tulsa at the time. And Brother Sumrall said, I want you and Brother Dufresne to meet me in Tulsa, and I want you to fly with me to Springfield, Missouri. I have been asked to speak the General Council of the Assemblies of God at their meeting in Springfield, and I want you all to go with me. Why he wanted us to go with him and what he said was life-changing. And I know we're running out of time now, so you'll have to join me tomorrow. I want to tell you what he said in front of all of those ministers in the Assemblies of God. So join me for tomorrow's Arkansas Live. We're talking about how to face the last days without fear. It's not a formula. It's not 10 steps. It's a revelation from the Word of God, and I think you'll be blessed by it. Remember, Jesus is Lord of Arkansas, and where you're watching, too.
Send your questions, comments, and testimonies to Happy Caldwell at Post Office Box 26207, Little Rock, Arkansas 72221, or email happycaldwell@vtntv.com. Remember to follow VTN on Facebook at VTN Your Arkansas Christian Connection, and follow Happy Caldwell on Twitter at Happy_Caldwell. VTN is on Roku. Search VTN in the channel store and add us to your lineup. Today's episode is available to watch on demand at VTNTV.com and click Watch. You can also watch VTN via live stream at VTNTV.com.